In this video, we'll take a look at the construct statement. Let's start by running a little program that uses the construct statement to allow the user to do query by example. Here we have a little program that has an action called query. Now when I choose the query action, trigger the query action, notice that I can move through the fields, but instead of doing an input where I'm adding new data, instead I'm able to use search criteria to search for particular rows that match my criteria. So when I choose OK, it returns to me the number of rows that were found, and I can scroll through them. Here just one row was returned. Let me go here and just look for all Wisconsin customers, and here I could browse through all that data that matched the criteria that I specified. Now to do that, we use a statement called construct, which does a couple of things. The first thing that it does is opens up the form for the user to enter their search criteria, and it allows for the use of expressions like wildcards and a variety of different matching type options for the user to use when searching for data. Now the columns that are open are completely limited by what is listed in the construct statement. So here we can access all of them, but we could certainly turn some off. So let's go ahead and cancel out of this and take a look at the code. So we can see our menu is set up. Now when the user chooses the query option, on action query here, we are going into a function called queryCust. Now in this function, you'll see here on line 28, we're using the construct statement to set up the query by example. So we're going to construct by name on all of the columns that were in the form, and we're going to construct a where clause, or a variable called where clause, that we've defined as a string. We could call this variable anything we wanted, but the reason we're calling it where clause here is because that's what the construct statement is doing for us. It's going to take those values that the user has put in as their search criteria and build the expression that is correct for the select statement. So we're going to be able to use this this information in this variable to build the select statement that goes and retrieves the right data for the user. So let's take a look first at just commenting out some of these columns that we've listed here. And let's go ahead and recompile that file and execute the program again. Now when I choose query, you can see that I'm only constructing a query based on the store number and the phone. So again, if I do greater than 100, I'm going to return, it tells me how many rows have been found, and I can scroll through those rows. So again, you can limit which fields are available to query on based on what is listed in the construct statement. Now let's take a look back at the code and continue on looking at how this is set up. The next section shows us the usage of IntFlag, which again is the variable we can check to see if the user or an interrupt signal has been received. So in other words, the user has pressed the cancel button. We need to know that so that we don't go ahead and execute the query. Instead, we can provide them here a little message that they've canceled out. So if IntFlag is true, in other words, the flag, the variable has been set to true, we know that they've done an interrupt. We go ahead and set it back to false so that we're able to trap it the next time around, and then we are clearing the form and giving them a message. Now, if they have not canceled, then again they have pressed OK, they've entered their search criteria, they've pressed OK, then we're going to just go and get the count of see how many rows are going to be returned. The reason for this is there's a couple different reasons. Different developers will use this kind of an option to first go get the count to perhaps limit the number of users, limit the number of rows that the user is trying to get. So if the count comes back at 100,000 rows, we might want to ask them to further filter or assist them in further filtering their result set. So get cusCount is just going to pass the where clause, and again the where clause is just the expression that Genero put together based on what the user had entered. So go run a select statement and return the count, and let's see how many rows were retrieved. Now if there is more than 0, here it's being used to go ahead and call this, go and do the actual select statement if more than 0 rows are found. If there were any rows at all, we want to go and get the data. So here's the called custSelect where clause, and if we scroll down we can see the custSelect statement down here. So here we're calling custSelect, we're passing in that where clause, and then what we're going to do is set up a select statement that is concatenated to the value in our where clause. So again, Genero BDL is building an expression based on what the user entered on the form for their search criteria, and we're going to use that in our select statement. Then here we're setting up a cursor because we know more than one row is being returned or multiple rows are being returned, and we're going to go and fetch those rows. Then once we have fetched the rows, go back up to our construct statement here, and we can see that the next thing here on line 59 that we're going to do is call a function called displayCust. Now displayCust is simply going to display the first row in the cursor set. The first row in the result set will be displayed on the form. So let's just run this program again and see in action what's going on. I'll move it over here so we can kind of see a little bit of the code behind there. We're going to go ahead and query, and let's say I want to find all rows that have a 7 in the phone number, and it found one row and it is showing me that row right there. If I hit query again and do greater than 101, the store number returns those rows. I could do greater than 101 and finding a 5 anywhere in the phone number, and it will return those rows for me here. Now again, if I query and cancel, then I clear the form and simply indicate that it's canceled by the user. Now just to better understand what's being sent to the database, or what is in the where clause that the user has entered when they've entered their search criteria, let's use a couple display statements just so that we can see what's happening. So first here we're going to display the where clause, and the where clause again is the information the user has entered. We want to see what that is that they've entered, and then we want to go ahead and also see what the full SQL text is that's being sent to the database. So let's go ahead and put a display here so that we can see that when this bit of code is executed. So we'll rebuild and execute. Now I go into a query and I'll do greater than 101 and also look for customers with a 7 in there. And when I choose OK, we see here that the where clause was displayed, and then the full select statement concatenated with the where clause. Now, in order to understand the various query operators that can be used, check the documentation. You'll want to give your users full access to all the query operators that they can use, from the star symbol to greater than, less than, question mark, etc. And that information, again, by the construct statement will then be translated into a where clause that can be used with the select statement.